At the beginning of May 1902, Saint-Pierre was still the jewel of Martinique. A crowded port city of cafes, churches, warehouses, theatres, distilleries, and ships moving in and out of the harbour beneath the green slopes of Mount Pelée. For generations, the volcano had been part of the landscape. It loomed above the city, but for most people, it was scenery, dramatic, familiar, and quiet enough to ignore. Then, in the spring of 1902, the mountain began to change. At first, the signs were unsettling, but not yet impossible to explain away. There were tremors in the ground, strange smells in the air, and ash drifting down from the summit like dirty snow. Soon the warnings grew harder to dismiss. Steam and ash burst from the volcano. Rivers turned hot and muddy. Animals fled the slopes. Birds dropped from the sky. Insects and snakes were driven down toward the city, as if the mountain itself were forcing everything alive away from it. People in the countryside were frightened enough to leave their homes and come into Saint-Pierre, believing the city would be safer than the villages near the volcano. But inside Saint-Pierre, fear collided with something more powerful than fear: routine. The shops were still open. The harbour was still busy. Families still had homes, businesses, churches, and jobs. And Martinique was in the middle of an election season when panic was not just dangerous, it was politically inconvenient. Officials did not want a mass evacuation. They did not want chaos in the streets, ships overwhelmed with people, or the island's most important city emptied just as voters were preparing to go to the polls. So a committee was formed to assess the danger, and the message that came back was the one people wanted desperately to believe. Saint-Pierre was safe. Mount Pelée was active, yes. The situation was serious, yes. But the city itself, they said, was not in immediate danger. And that reassurance mattered because most people in Saint-Pierre were not volcanologists. They knew what they could see: ash, smoke, dead animals, frightened neighbors, and a mountain behaving in ways they had never seen before. But they also knew what they were being told by men in authority. Stay calm. Do not panic. There is no need to flee. By May 7th, the day before the disaster, Saint-Pierre was a city living under a warning it had been taught to mistrust. Some people tried to leave. Some were unable to. Some stayed because they believed the official reports. Others stayed because leaving meant abandoning everything they owned for a danger no one could clearly define. After all, most people imagined volcanic danger as lava, a glowing river that might be terrifying, but at least could be seen, measured, and avoided. What they did not understand was that Mount Pelée was capable of something far faster. On the morning of May the 8th, Ascension Day, Saint-Pierre was beginning another anxious day beneath the volcano. People were waking, eating, praying, working, waiting. Ships sat in the harbour. The streets were filled not only with residents, but with refugees who had come to the city for safety. Then, a little after 8 o'clock, Mount Pelée exploded. What came down the mountain was not a slow-moving lava flow. It was a burning avalanche of gas, ash, and shattered rock, a pyroclastic surge racing towards Saint-Pierre faster than any person could run. In moments, the cloud hit the city. The heat ignited buildings. The blast smashed through streets and homes. Churches, shops, warehouses, and ships were torn open by fire and pressure. And in Saint-Pierre, the fire found fuel everywhere. This was one of the great rum-producing cities of the Caribbean, and when the surge reached the industrial waterfront, distilleries and warehouses exploded. People died almost instantly, burned, crushed, suffocated, or struck down by air so hot it destroyed the lungs before there was time to understand what was happening. Within minutes, Saint-Pierre was gone. A city of roughly 30,000 people had been erased so quickly that many victims were found where ordinary life had left them: at tables, in doorways, in churches, in the streets, and aboard ships that never had time to escape the harbour. And yet, from the ruins, a few survived. The most famous was a prisoner named Lodger Silbaris, also known as Louis-Auguste Siparis. He had been locked in a small, thick-walled cell, partly underground, with only a narrow opening to the outside world. The same isolation meant to punish him became the thing that shielded him from the full force of the blast. For days he lay burned, thirsty, and trapped in darkness while the city around him smoldered. When rescuers finally found him, he became one of only a tiny handful of people known to have survived inside the devastated city zone. Another was Léon Compère Léandre, a shoemaker who lived near the edge of the destruction. Badly burned, he managed to escape into a less affected area, while almost everyone deeper inside Saint-Pierre was killed. Out of a city of around 30,000 people, only 2 or 3 clear survivors were found within the area the surge had consumed. The real tragedy of Mount Pelée is not that people failed to notice the danger. They noticed. They smelled it in the air. They saw it falling from the sky. They watched animals flee, rivers boil, and ash cover the city they loved. But warning signs are easy to explain away when acting on them would mean panic, disruption, embarrassment, and loss. Saint-Pierre was not destroyed because its people were foolish. It was destroyed because they were asked to trust reassurance over evidence, normalcy over fear, and authority over the mountain itself. For days, Mount Pelée had been speaking. On May 8, 1902, it answered in a language no city could survive.